The autumn air carried a chill that seemed to seep into every corner of Millbrook, Oregon, on that October afternoon in 1997. Detective Sarah Chen pulled her jacket tighter as she stood in the doorway of what should have been a warm family gathering. Instead, she found herself at the center of what would become one of the most baffling disappearances in the county's history. The dining room table was set for 8 people. Fine china plates gleamed under the soft afternoon light, filtering through lace curtains. A pot roast sat cooling on the kitchen counter, still warm to the touch when the first family members arrived. Green beans remained crisp in their serving dish, and fresh rolls waited in a cloth-lined basket. Everything suggested that Harold and Margaret Thompson had been in the middle of preparing their traditional Sunday family lunch, when something interrupted them so completely that they simply vanished. Detective Chen walked through the modest 2-story home, her footsteps echoing in the unusual silence. The Thompson house had always been filled with laughter and conversation during these weekly gatherings, according to their daughter, Linda Garrison, who had discovered the scene. Linda's hands still trembled as she recounted finding the front door unlocked, calling out for her parents, and receiving no response except the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The scent of Margaret's famous apple pie lingered in the kitchen, a ghost of normalcy in a scene that defied all logic. Harold's coffee mug sat half empty on the counter, still faintly warm, suggesting that whatever had happened had occurred within minutes of the family's expected arrival. The initial investigation revealed disturbing details that made no sense. Harold's reading glasses lay folded neatly on his favorite armchair, as if he had just set them down to answer the door. Margaret's knitting sat half-finished on the side table, the yarn still attached to the needles, creating a trail that led toward the kitchen before stopping abruptly. Their medications remained in the bathroom cabinet, untouched. Harold's heart pills, Margaret's arthritis medication, all the prescriptions that kept the elderly couple functioning day to day, abandoned without explanation. Most puzzling of all was the missing car. Harold's blue 1994 Honda Accord had vanished along with the couple, despite neighbors reporting no unusual sounds or sightings of strangers in the quiet residential area. The Thompsons had lived on Maple Street for 43 years, raising their 3 children in the same house where Margaret still tended her prized rose garden, and Harold maintained a workshop in the basement filled with woodworking projects he would never complete. The Thompson family never stopped searching. Linda Garrison organized search parties that combed through forests and fields surrounding Millbrook, their voices echoing through the dense Oregon wilderness as they called out names that would never receive an answer. Her brother Michael flew in from California every anniversary of the disappearance, posting flyers with his parents' smiling faces on telephone poles and shop windows throughout the county. Their youngest sister, Patricia, moved back to town permanently, unable to shake the feeling that her parents might someday return to find no one waiting for them. She maintained their house exactly as they had left it, paying the bills, tending Margaret's roses, and keeping Harold's tools clean and organized in the basement workshop. Detective Chen, now retired, kept the case files in her home office, reviewing them periodically with the obsession of someone who had encountered a puzzle that refused to be solved. She had interviewed dozens of people over the years, following leads that inevitably led nowhere. The mail carrier who had delivered letters to the Thompson house for 15 years, the grocery store clerk who knew Margaret's shopping habits by heart, the mechanic who had serviced Harold's Honda for over a decade, all had provided the same frustrating testimony. The Thompsons were creatures of habit, predictable in their routines, beloved by their community. They had no known enemies, no debts, no involvement in anything that might have made them targets. Harold had worked as a high school mathematics teacher for 38 years before retiring, earning respect from colleagues and students alike for his patient explanations and genuine care for struggling learners. Margaret had been a librarian and volunteer at the local animal shelter, known for her gentle way with both books and abandoned pets. They were, by all accounts, ordinary people who had lived unremarkable lives until the day they disappeared. The case had gone cold, not from lack of effort, but from lack of evidence. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no indication of where Harold and Margaret Thompson had gone, or why they had left behind everything they held dear. The community eventually moved on, though the empty house on Maple Street remained a constant reminder of the mystery that had shaken their sense of security. The weekly family lunches became memorial gatherings, then eventually stopped altogether as the pain of the empty chairs became too much to bear. Linda's own children grew up hearing stories about grandparents they barely remembered, their absence becoming a defining characteristic of family gatherings. Michael built a successful software company, but never stopped funding private investigators who promised breakthroughs that never materialized. Patricia never married, dedicating her life to preserving her parents' memory and maintaining hope for their return. Hope began to fade as years turned into decades. Family members aged, some moving away, others accepting that they might never know what happened to Harold and Margaret. The investigation files gathered dust in the sheriff's department, officially open but practically dormant. New detectives would occasionally review the case, bringing fresh perspectives, but reaching the same dead ends that had frustrated their predecessors. The Thompson disappearance became local legend, a cautionary tale parents told their children about locking doors and staying vigilant, even in small towns where everyone knew everyone else. Then came March 15th, 2017, a date that would reopen wounds the Thompson family thought had finally begun to heal. Kevin Martinez, a wildlife photographer from Portland, had been exploring the remote areas of the Cascade foothills when he spotted something unusual at the bottom of a steep ravine. The harsh Oregon winter had given way to an early spring, and recent rainfall had washed away enough debris to reveal what appeared to be the burned-out shell of an automobile, nearly hidden beneath 20 years of accumulated vegetation and fallen branches. Kevin had been tracking a family of red foxes through the wilderness when the glint of metal caught his eye from the ridge above the ravine. At first, he assumed he had discovered an old farming vehicle or construction equipment abandoned by loggers decades earlier. The Oregon wilderness was littered with such remnants of human activity, slowly being reclaimed by nature. But something about the size and shape of the wreckage seemed wrong for heavy machinery. Kevin's curiosity turned to concern when he realized he might be looking at something more significant than industrial debris. He called the sheriff's department from his satellite phone, and within hours, a recovery team was making the treacherous descent into the ravine to examine what would prove to be the first concrete evidence in the Thompson disappearance case in 2 decades. The recovery operation required specialized equipment and experienced climbers, as the vehicle had come to rest in an almost inaccessible location surrounded by unstable rock formations and dense undergrowth. The vehicle identification number, etched permanently into the metal frame, confirmed what investigators and family members had feared and hoped for in equal measure. The twisted, blackened remains belonged to Harold Thompson's blue Honda Accord, the car that had vanished along with the elderly couple on that October afternoon had been sitting at the bottom of a ravine, approximately 80 miles from their home, for the better part of 20 years. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Forensic analysis revealed that the car had been burned deliberately, likely with an accelerant, sometime shortly after the disappearance. The intense heat had destroyed most potential evidence, including any DNA that might have provided clues about what happened to Harold and Margaret. No human remains were found in or around the vehicle, deepening the mystery rather than solving it. The car's position suggested it had either been pushed over the edge of the ravine or had crashed through the guardrail that had since been replaced. Skid marks from 20 years earlier had long since been erased by weather and time. Detective James Morrison, who had taken over the cold case from Detective Chen, found himself facing the same bewildering questions that had haunted his predecessor. but now with a tangible piece of evidence that demanded explanation. If Harold and Margaret had been in the car when it was driven to the ravine, where were their bodies? If they hadn't been in the car, who had taken it? And why had they chosen such a remote location to destroy it? The deliberate burning suggested an attempt to destroy evidence. But evidence of what? The ravine where the Honda was discovered required specialized knowledge to access. The dirt road leading to the area was unmarked and rarely used, known primarily to hunters and local residents who had grown up exploring the wilderness. This suggested that whoever had disposed of the car was familiar with the region, possibly someone with deep local connections. The location was far enough from main roads that the fire would have gone unnoticed, yet accessible enough for someone to transport a vehicle and the materials needed to burn it completely. As news of the discovery spread through Millbrook, old suspicions resurfaced and new theories emerged. Some residents remembered Harold's occasional mentions of problems with students from his teaching days, wondering if someone had harbored a grudge for decades. Others pointed to Margaret's volunteer work at the animal shelter, speculating about conflicts with people who had been denied pet adoptions or who had been reported for animal abuse. The renewed investigation brought the Thompson family back together in ways they hadn't experienced since the initial disappearance. Linda, now in her 60s with grandchildren of her own, found herself once again organizing efforts to uncover the truth about her parents' fate. The discovery of the Honda brought back memories she had spent years trying to suppress. The smell of her mother's cooking that last Sunday, the sound of her father's voice as he discussed plans for winterizing the garden, the terrible silence that had greeted her when she arrived for lunch. Michael, who had built a successful career in software development, used his resources to hire private investigators to supplement the official inquiry. He had never forgiven himself for missing that final family lunch, having stayed in California to close a business deal that had seemed important at the time. 20 years later, no professional success could diminish his regret or his determination to find answers. Patricia, who had never married and had dedicated her life to keeping her parents' memory alive, became the family spokesperson, fielding calls from reporters and coordinating with law enforcement. She had spent 2 decades imagining scenarios where her parents might still be alive, might have suffered amnesia, or been kidnapped and held somewhere far from home. The discovery of the burned Honda forced her to confront possibilities she had never wanted to consider. Detective Morrison approached the case with fresh eyes and modern forensic techniques unavailable in 1997. He ordered DNA testing on trace evidence found in the Honda's remains, hoping that advances in genetic analysis might reveal something previous investigations had missed. He also began mapping the area around the ravine, looking for any additional evidence that might have been overlooked or scattered by 2 decades of weather and wildlife activity. The investigation expanded to include interviews with residents of the remote area where the car was found. Most were longtime locals who lived on scattered properties connected by a network of unpaved roads. Several remembered hearing what might have been an explosion or large fire sometime in the late 1990s, but none had investigated at the time, assuming it was controlled burning or hunters using pyrotechnics. One interview proved particularly intriguing. Agnes Whitmore, an elderly widow who lived alone on a property bordering the ravine, recalled seeing unusual activity around the time of the Thompson disappearance. She remembered a night in late October 1997 when she had been awakened by the sound of vehicles and voices in the early morning hours. When she looked out her window, she could see lights moving through the trees, but she had assumed it was hunters or teenagers and had gone back to sleep. Her property included several acres of dense forest, and she had grown accustomed to occasional trespassers over the years. Agnes's account provided the first potential timeline for when the Honda might have been brought to the ravine. If her memory was accurate, The car had been disposed of within days of Harold and Margaret's disappearance, suggesting a level of planning and preparation that contradicted theories of a random crime or spontaneous incident. The timing also suggested that whoever was responsible had acted quickly to destroy evidence, indicating either panic or calculated effort to avoid detection. The burned Honda also revealed something unexpected during the forensic examination. Hidden beneath years of rust and fire damage, investigators found evidence of impact damage to the vehicle's front end that appeared to have occurred before the fire. The pattern suggested the car had struck something, or someone, with considerable force. Paint samples recovered from the damaged area were sent for analysis, though 20 years of exposure to the elements had degraded most trace evidence beyond useful examination. This discovery shifted the investigation in a new direction. Detective Morrison began exploring the possibility that Harold and Margaret had not simply vanished, but had been involved in some kind of accident that someone had tried to cover up by destroying the evidence. The remote location of the car's destruction suggested that whoever was responsible had intimate knowledge of the area and had carefully planned the disposal to avoid detection. The investigation also uncovered financial irregularities that had never been thoroughly examined in the original case. Harold and Margaret's bank accounts had remained untouched after their disappearance, with automatic deposits continuing and bills being paid by Patricia to maintain the house. But a deeper analysis revealed that Harold had made several large cash withdrawals in the weeks before the disappearance, totaling nearly $8,000. The purpose of these withdrawals had never been determined, and the cash had never been found. Margaret had also made unusual purchases during the same period, buying camping equipment and non-perishable food items that seemed inconsistent with their typical lifestyle. The elderly couple had never shown interest in outdoor activities beyond Margaret's gardening, making these purchases particularly puzzling. Some investigators theorized that Harold and Margaret might have been planning to disappear voluntarily, but the untouched table setting and abandoned medications suggested otherwise. As the investigation progressed, family members found themselves grappling with the possibility that the truth about Harold and Margaret's disappearance might be more disturbing than they had imagined. The elderly couple they remembered as gentle, loving grandparents might have encountered something or someone that had led to tragedy, and the person responsible had spent 20 years believing they had successfully covered their tracks. The case began attracting national attention as details of the discovery emerged. Cold case television programs expressed interest in featuring the Thompson disappearance, and online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries began generating theories and speculation about what might have happened to the missing couple. Amateur investigators analyzed photographs of the crime scene and debated the significance of every piece of evidence, sometimes providing insights that professional investigators had overlooked. But for the Thompson family, the renewed attention brought both hope and renewed anguish. Linda found herself reliving the trauma of losing her parents, while simultaneously feeling grateful that someone might finally be held accountable for whatever had happened to them. The discovery of the Honda felt like a step toward closure, but it also opened up possibilities they had never considered and weren't sure they were prepared to face. Detective Morrison knew that solving a 20-year-old case would require patience, persistence, and probably a measure of luck. The physical evidence was limited, witnesses' memories had faded, and potential suspects might have died or moved away. But the discovery of the Honda Accord had proven that secrets could remain hidden for decades before finally coming to light. The investigation took an unexpected turn when forensic analysis of soil samples from around the burned vehicle revealed the presence of human DNA that did not match Harold or Margaret Thompson. The DNA belonged to an unknown individual, possibly someone who had been at the scene when the car was destroyed. This discovery provided the first potential lead to identifying whoever was responsible for disposing of the vehicle, and by extension, possibly for the disappearance itself. Advanced forensic techniques also revealed that the fire had been set using a specific type of accelerant that was commonly available in 1997, but had since been reformulated for safety reasons. This detail helped narrow the time frame and suggested that whoever had burned the car had access to materials that were readily available at hardware stores and gas stations throughout the region. As investigators continued their work, examining every piece of evidence with modern techniques and following leads that had been impossible to pursue in 1997, the Thompson family waited for answers they had never stopped hoping to find. The burned car at the bottom of the ravine had broken 20 years of silence, but the most important questions remained unanswered. Patricia still maintained her parents' house, still tended Margaret's roses, still hoped that someday she would have answers that would allow her to finally say goodbye. Linda struggled with the possibility that her parents had suffered, while Michael threw himself into supporting the investigation with the same intensity he had once applied to building his business empire. The investigation continues today, driven by the determination of law enforcement officers who refuse to let another 20 years pass without answers, and by a family who will never stop searching for the truth. New leads emerge periodically. Witnesses come forward with half-remembered details, and advances in forensic science continue to provide new ways of analyzing old evidence. What had happened to Harold and Margaret Thompson on that quiet Sunday afternoon? Who had taken their car and destroyed it in such a remote location? And most importantly, were the elderly couple still out there somewhere, or had their disappearance been far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined? The discovery of the burned Honda had answered one question while raising dozens of others, proving that some mysteries only deepen with time, and that the truth, no matter how long buried, has a way of eventually fighting its way back to the surface. The investigation remains active, a testament to the enduring power of family love and the relentless pursuit of justice, even when that justice has been delayed by 2 decades of silence.